Hello there, my friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the new moon in Leo 2. And I am very excited to be joined by my astrology teacher and good friend, Mr. Acyuta-bhava Das. How are you doing, Achyuta?
Good, good. It's awesome to be here. I'm glad to shoot the breeze and talk about this new moon and see what's going on with it.
Yeah, this is super, super exciting. I'm so grateful that you're here with us today. I'm seeing people telling us where they're from in the chat here. I just want to, before we get started, Achuta's got about an hour today, so I want to be respectful of his time. I'm going to be kind of going through the chat and looking for questions, and I may not be able to get to every single comment like I usually do in these. So just be aware of that in the chat. But we've got people coming from Grafton, Ontario, Washington State, New York City, London, Yorkshire, UK, Scotland, Minneapolis. Katie Young from Minneapolis. I don't know if you know Katie, but we've got an international crew here, and I usually have some people that join me from Finland too, so that's neat. Aloha from Maui, so exciting, very exciting. Well, thank you all for being here today. And again, if you have a question for me or Achyuta, please put question, maybe even capitalized in the chat box so I don't miss anything like that. We'd be happy to go over any questions that you have regarding this lunation or astrology in general. All right, Mr. Achyuta. So tell us more about yourself and your programs. I know that you have a website, Nightlight Astrology, which is I've gone through your programs for a few years now, and really have some exciting things that you're working on. So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing.
Yeah. I teach and see clients, so I practice Hellenistic astrology with like a good modern twist, because I kind of cut my teeth on modern psychological archetypal astrology, a little bit of evolutionary astrology, and then gradually started taking in traditional forms like horary at first, and then eventually Hellenistic astrology. And I was, seeing clients and creating content and doing the things that astrologers do, teaching classes and stuff like that. But then I think it was probably 2015 or 16 or something like that, really made the switch fully to ancient forms of astrology, again, with kind of like some modern infusion. And so I've been doing that, ever since. And I've got a YouTube channel, and, I create daily content year round, and then teach classes and see clients. And I love it. It's my favorite thing to do. And yeah, when you came through the programs, a lot of the Hellenistic components of my programs were like in earlier stages of development compared to where they are now. So you were like kind of like part of the pilot programs for some of them, and also easily one of the best students I've ever had in my program. So it's really great to see you just kicking butt and doing awesome things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know what? I loved your program so much that I took many of your classes twice. So I got version A and B, and
Right.
so I really have a lot of gratitude and really grateful for being able to find you as a teacher, and was able to really expand my knowledge base just through your guidance and whatnot. So I originally heard Achyuta on the astrology podcast, and I was like, "Who is this guy?" And then I started watching your videos on Facebook when you were doing Facebook lives,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just so impressed with your humility and your I don't know, just your gracefulness that I was like, "This is the guy. This is who I want to study with." And
Oh, thanks, man.
so it's a mutual admiration here for sure. Even though we root for opposite sports teams,
That's right.
you got Vikings purple in the background there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it's all good. It's a friendly thing with gentle ribbing with the football teams. So
Yeah, mostly with me getting it because my teams lose compared to your teams, but that's all good.
yeah, it's it's all a game, right? It's a mock competition. I think that it really kind of
True.
speaks to that sort of five of wands card in the first decan of Leo. With it's not really a real battle. There's not a
Right.
whole lot at stake. Although when we were younger, we probably would have argued otherwise.
Right, right on.
All right. So, yeah, again, really excited that you're here today. If you haven't checked out Acyuta's website, nightlightastrology.com, there is a wealth of information and resources. He has a really great YouTube channel where he does video. I mean, you are an inspiration as far as cranking out content, my friend. Trying to keep up with you and your content is that is a fool's errand because you are Mr. Consistency. And I've seen this guy crank out videos and horoscopes while passing a kidney stone. So your work ethic is never in question. So check him out on those channels. Anything new that is coming up that you want to get out there before we dive into it?
I have a new program that's starting this fall called Readings and Passages. Some people might find that interesting. I always have my year one and year two programs kind of they're cyclically, so they start in the fall and spring every year. So those are always there, but this brand new program that I have called Readings and Passages is launching, and it's basically an opportunity for people to get really deep into client-based readings, watching me read for clients and then break down the sessions afterwards, being able to ask questions about live readings. And then the second component of the program is about breaking down really interesting textual passages from ancient astrology texts. Like we're looking at Rhetorius, we're looking at Firmicus, a little bit of Valens. So, and I'm not just picking here's how to do something technically. We're trying to find passages that challenge our understanding of astrology philosophically, or that help us to understand something about a planet that we may not typically think about, or stuff like that. So reading ancient passages and looking at live astrology readings. So I'm really excited about that course coming up.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I liked about your courses the most was that you were able to demonstrate the techniques with clients in real time. That was super, super valuable to be able to see how you would handle a certain situation where it wasn't just this pre-canned thing. You had to think on your feet and be able to say, oh, I've actually got a real person in front of me, and what would we say in those situations? So that sounds like an amazing course, and really excited for that to be coming out here.
Thank you.
All right. So you also have speaker series that are coming out fairly regularly as well, right?
Yeah, every quarter we usually have 3 or 4 speakers. Spencer just gave a talk in our most recent one. We haven't put together our fall speaker series yet, but if you go to my website, nightlightastrology.com, and click on the events page, the speaker series will be there and you can sign up. It's free. See some really cool astrologers giving talks about different topics, and the replays are there for like a week or something. So you can see people like Spencer give awesome talks as well.
Perfect. All right. What do you say we dive into it here? I'm looking in the chat. I'm not seeing necessarily any questions, just a lot of compliments for our guest today and his programs. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look at my Astro Gold program with the term rulers on the outside wheel here. So I'm looking at the chart of August 8th, 2021, which is a Sunday, 9:50 a.m. Eastern time. Make the appropriate adjustment for your time zone. And we've got the sun and the moon at 16 degrees Leo. Acyuta, anything that sticks out to you right away with this new moon lunation?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that the Saturn-Uranus dynamic has been the story of the summer, as far as I can tell. And when all of these planets have passed through Leo, we've had Venus and Mars go through Leo. We've had Mercury go through Leo. The sun has been going through Leo. They've all passed through and activated and reactivated that square from Saturn and Uranus. And to me, the sun's just passed through the opposition. No more oppositions to Saturn for a while. It's like, that's nice. And then this new moon cycle starts with a square to Uranus. The sun, as this new moon cycle unfolds and we get to the full moon of the cycle, the sun's going to oppose Jupiter, which in my mind is a pretty auspicious transit overall. So I like this as a very kind of like the hero's homecoming, the return, the theme of return mythologically, or even just this idea of breakthroughs that have come after the labor of the past couple of months. that's really broad in general, but that's the feeling I get with an opening square from the new moon to Uranus after having passed through the opposition, the sun's opposition to Saturn on the late part of this last moon cycle.
Yeah, the hero's return. That's perfect. That really fits in with the second decan of Leo. There is a card that's associated with that, with the Six of Wands.
Oh my gosh, that's perfect.
Yeah, right.
I
I
did
mean,
not know that, people, either. That was
so
not, yeah.
you are right on the wavelength, my friend. So check this out. Check out the synchronicity here. So this card shows a man on a horse with a crown of laurels, and he's returning home from a military victory. Okay, so they had this kind of lavish parade that was called the triumphants in Roman culture. And when somebody had a significant military victory, they would have a parade where they would come home, parade through the town, and be quote unquote king for a day. And they would parade through the town, but they also would make the ending point was the temple of Zeus. So this is a double Jupiter ruled decan. So they would make a sacrifice to Zeus as well. So a public victory, like you said, like the return of coming home. One of the warnings that they had with this, though, was maintaining your humility when you are having success. And I think that that theme was coming up quite a bit in the other divination that I was doing with the I-Ching and the animal of the day that we'll talk about here. But yeah, it's so perfect that you're like, oh, it's the hero's return coming home, right? And it's an easier lunation, right, than this last Leo one that we had that had both of the malefics present, right?
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but we had a good stretch where Venus was enclosed by the two malefics.
Mm.
And that was difficult. I'll tell you that because I was on family vacation. And like family vacation had some drama that looked just like Venus enclosed by the malefics.
Oh man.
And I mean, I won't go into it, but like it was a rough lunation cycle
You can
in
go
my
into it if you want
experience.
to, but you don't have to.
Well, I mean, here's the gist of it was that I'll just speak a little bit generally, but
Sure.
Ram Dass said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. So, so I was seeing my nephew for the first time, who was born during COVID. And, there was a lot of joy. There's also this feeling of my mom and her partner are in the midst of moving, right? And there's a certain kind of drama that's going on between the two of them that we were all sort of held captive to.
Oh boy.
So it's like Venus being held captive by the malefics. That was in my fourth house, Venus, home and family. So
Right.
that's basically what it was.
So you are being the witness to the drama, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's tough. Um, yeah, those enclosures are no joke. I've actually had some clients lately that had it in their natal chart, and that is a technique that I think was really valuable learning throughout our work together. And so, if you're not familiar with a malefic enclosure, what that means is that the malefic planets, Mars and Saturn, are casting a ray on either side of a particular planet. So we're having Mars casting a ray on one side of Venus and Saturn casting a ray on the other side. So it's like this feeling of entrapment, enclosure. So that's something that really, if you're new to astrology, really making sure to take some time to take a look if there's something like that going on in someone's chart, because that can really give you some interesting insight. All right. Well, I'm sorry to hear that your vacation was a little bit of a bummer, right? I mean, that's
It was,
totally like Leo opposed by Saturn too, right?
and the funny thing is that as soon as the enclosure passed, the vacation turned and got a lot better. So it ended up
There
being
you go.
fine. But isn't that funny?
Yeah, that's crazy. Um, so we've also, within this lunation, we also have, Jupiter just ingressed back or retrograded back into Aquarius. And the other thing that was sticking out to me was this Venus Neptune opposition that's sort of, it's not really aspecting the lunation, but it is sort of baked into the chart of it. So I wonder if you have thoughts on either one of those aspects of this chart.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think we're going to get into this a little bit later, but um, Liz Green had this book that she wrote called The Astrology of Fate.
Mm.
And there's this section called The Myths of the Zodiac. And she talks a little bit about the fate that's involved with the hero's return. The reason it's on my mind is because I was just rereading this in her book really recently. And one of the things that she talks about with the hero's return is the hero, when the hero gets back, the hero is often tempted with a kind of complacency, having accomplished something.
Mm.
And, I think we're probably on the same page about this, that you look at that Venus Neptune opposition and you think, oh, there's this big breakthrough kind of moment with the new moon. And with Venus opposite Neptune, we could be drinking our own Kool-Aid a little bit this month, I think. And that's what I would be careful about. Either that or like the feeling of a breakthrough, um, but also, a little bit of like a buyer beware, like make sure it's real, make sure it's not too hasty. Like Venus Neptune could sell you something and the enthusiasm is there to buy it. And you may just need to be a little bit discerning about the details or whatever.
Totally. Yeah. I think that, trying not to get high on your own supply or high on your own ego, if you are having some sort of public victory, is really an important theme, like you were saying, that's flowing through this entire, chart, through this lunation, through the divination. Um, again, I think really the antidote to that is to continue with the type of behavior that got you there in the first place, which
Mhm.
was hard work and humility. If you are, getting to a certain point of success, um, it's all about sustaining it, right? I mean, we got a fixed sign here with the sun and the moon in Leo, and trying to sustain that energy over time. One other thing I'd like to add to what you were saying about Venus and Neptune is Venus is in its fall at this point. So I remember you were saying, what was the quote that you had about, I think this was coming from one of the traditional authors, where Venus in a Mercury sign and how they are different and how they are at odds with one another.
Right. It comes from Rhetorius, who was kind of compiling a bunch of authors that probably came significantly prior to him. And, he says, why is it that Venus is fallen or depressed in the sign that Mercury is exalted, Virgo? And why is it that Venus is exalted in Pisces in the sign that Mercury is depressed? Like, what's the magic relationship in those signs between these two planets? And he said, we say that at the place where the intellectual is increasing or like greatly heightened, which would be Virgo, then the sensual is depressed. But at the place where the sensual is exalted and lifted up on high, which would be Pisces, there the intellectual is depressed. So it's not to say that you can't be intellectual and have Mercury in Pisces, or you can't be sensual and have Venus in Virgo. To my mind, it's just making us aware of an archetypal tension that's inherent between Venus and Mercury when Venus is in a Mercury ruled sign, or vice versa. So Venus in Virgo, for example, I tell this story all the time in my classes, but the I met this guy. His name's Gad Cohen, really amazing guy, and he's uh, has a really amazing history, a lot of fame as a stylist. And I met him in New York City through a mutual friend, and he studies astrology. Ended up trading some private tutoring for him for him to do my wife's hair for the wedding.
Nice.
He was like Vogue's top stylist of the year in the magazines and stuff like that earlier in his career. And I was asking him, well, where's your Venus? You've got to have like the most amazing Venus because you've had, and he's like, oh, it's in Virgo. It's all messed up in Virgo. And I was like, well, how do you interpret that? And he was like, well, I think that Venus in Virgo, people, if they're anything like myself, sometimes are masterful technicians and craftsmen, detail oriented, meticulous, but sometimes have underlying anxiety about their work or have a hard time relaxing.
Yeah.
So then later in my life, we had a woman from our yoga community who stepped up to be the interior designer, decorating our expanded yoga studio, or designing it. And she had Venus in Virgo as well. And I'm just getting to know her. I was like, she was masterful in terms of the detail and, in that kind of thing. she also had that kind of underlying anxiety, some self-worth issues. Like, and she was very open about this. I'm not saying anything she wouldn't say,
Sure.
but so I think that it's not that someone that art can't be good or that beauty can't or love can't work. It's just you're working with the tension of Venus and Mercury somehow.
Yeah, that sparks some thoughts about how Schmidt would think about these planets, where Mercury would be questioning and casting doubt, right, and bringing something to the witness stand. Where we're trying to bring harmony, but we're going to have that questioning, that existential crisis around our skill set and whatnot. Something else that comes up to me as well with Virgo, this quality of disgust. I don't know if you ever think about it in that way. I have 3 Virgo planets, and I mean that in the most functional way possible. Like, we're trying to figure out the value, right? It's not just about rejecting something. It's about, what are we going to store for the winter, right? What is going to sustain us? And I've been thinking, like, maybe that anxiety is coming from trying to store something that we know will nourish us, rather than not having what we need when the dark, cold nights of winter are going to be coming.
Right. Yeah. There's something about the economy or like efficiency of Venus and Virgo. It's like what's desirable, but also what's smart. Um, and I like what you said about disgust. Like, James Hillman wrote this book called Aphrodite's Justice, or Aphrodite and Justice, or something like that. And man, it was just a short little, almost like 80-page treatise or something. But in that book, he's an archetypal psychologist who studied with Jung. And for people who don't know, but in that book, he was saying that so much of what defines a person's ethic is the same thing that defines their sense of taste.
Hmm.
So, for example, what I find lovely or attractive is going to be really closely or intimately linked to what I find to be just or fair. And then on the flip side, what I find to be ugly, repulsive, or disgusting is going to be very closely linked to what I find unethical.
Hmm.
And I thought that was always really interesting, considering that one of Venus's domiciles is Libra, which is so closely associated with fairness,
Yeah,
and like our kind of like an ethic or something like that.
I like that. I like that. Um, yeah, something of that nature kind of comes up in Austin Coppock's book, 36 Faces, with this third decan. Um, he calls that decan the sarcophagus, which is really interesting, because he talks about the dichotomy of preservation versus returning something to the earth. And there's a real awareness of that in this particular decan, of that form is ephemeral. It is not something that is going to be able to be sustained in this material reality. Um, but essence is important with this. And I could get the feeling, and I see what you think about this. Like, I get the feeling with Venus here opposing Neptune, I could see this being like, we're trying to preserve or hold together a form that needs to pass back to the earth. And
Hmm.
we may even have this, like, you know, I don't know, transcendent, crusading type of experience with it opposition with Neptune. Like, we're willing to sacrifice anything to maintain the integrity of the form.
Right. Right. Yeah. And or I think you could also look at it as the almost like the flip side of it would be something about the disappointment, like it doesn't live up to the form. It can't match the ideal. It's fallen short somehow. And
Yeah.
can I allow for that to be, or yeah, do I continue to insist that something, conform to the ideal? Almost like, how comfortable are we with some kind of aesthetic or relational like failure or disappointment? And to my mind, one of the beautiful things about Venus Neptune that I see in transits to people's natal Venus from transiting Neptune in their birth chart, for example, would be that they may go through an experience that, like falling in love with someone that feels like, oh my God, this is it, only to realize that, it's a metaphorical Don Juan. You know what I mean? It's like
Sure.
some fleeting thing that's coming through. And um, I don't, most of the time, I don't hear people heartbroken about it.
Hmm.
Afterward, I hear people kind of like wiser and a little bit more sober
Yeah.
and more willing to make intelligent compromises in their life with what their ideals are and what they need to be happy, or what they need from a spouse or partner, or something like that. So these disappointments, if we embrace them, have fun with them, get a cosmic chuckle out of them, I think could almost help us to accept the way in which things miss the mark and fall short.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that I really learned in your programs, and one of the things that you really opened my eyes to, was the phrase, you are not your chart, and you may have a planet that represents you in there. You may have a planet that represents someone else, but I've kind of taken that I've expanded that in my own mind to say the chart can offer both the challenge and the solution, even if the solution is transcendence and acceptance, right? Even if it's like, oh, well, this may be a limitation that we have to accept in our life. And you can really, I think, uncover that through what the impulse of that planet is. Like another guy that really opened my eyes to some things was one of the guests you had on as a speaker, Martin Hermes, when he was talking about the potter and the clay, right? And what is the action of that planet versus what is the quality of the material that they're working with?
Right. Yeah, it's a great distinction. And there's certainly one that ancient astrologers were really aware of, in terms of there being this world of ideal forms, and then this world of materiality. It's like a river of energies that are always forming and coming to be and passing away. And if we can see an ideal, but we haven't reconciled the ideal with the material, then we're always going to be disappointed. Whereas if we can, make peace with the fact that things in this world resemble ideals, but they come to be and pass away. It's like, I mean, isn't that sort of the point of any spiritual tradition you can think of?
Yeah.
Taoism is
Yeah.
like that, and Buddhism and yoga, and even Christian. I think even Jesus teaches about these kinds of things. So it seems to me like, especially even like Native American traditions, shamanic traditions, I think there's always this appreciation for, you have to reconcile between the ideal world that lives in the mind somewhere, and the world of constant fluctuation and change.
Yeah. And I tend to, you know, I tend to think of the ideal as essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Essence is that eternal form, and the actual material forms, those are transient, right? And this is something that um, is really difficult for human beings to come to terms with. Is that forms are going to change, but the essence is what's eternal. And like you said, that's the goal of these spiritual practices, is to really get more in alignment with the essence rather than, I guess, the hubris of being attached to form, right? I mean, there is a certain hubris in it, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it tends to take over when we think of ourselves as forms, rather than, or our worth or our happiness in relation to forms, rather than getting to know or cultivating our essence. I mean, it's there. So cultivating, I guess, just means becoming more conscious of the fact that we're spirit souls, sojourning through forms and experiences that are fleeting. And how can we make that a good thing and not something that we're constantly struggling with? And, we tend to struggle with it when we say we put the form in front of the essence. And it should be that we if we focus on the essence, the form follows.
Yes. Yes. I love that. We have a couple questions coming in here. Are we ready for a question or two?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So Michelle has a question about Venus and Virgo. What do you think of Venus and Virgo in the 12th and Mercury and Libra in the first being in mutual reception? Would this mitigate some of the challenges of both?
This would be like in a natal chart. Is that?
I think so. I think it's a specific question, but it may be good for, you know, figuring out what mutual receptions might be able to do in this case.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is a mitigating factor. And I think that there's going to be, oh, probably, I would look at that and wonder about, questions about identity and self-worth and the mind body balance between, especially as it relates to physical appearance, self-esteem. I can't remember if it was Venus in the first or 12th, but
Yeah,
was it
Venus in the 12th, Mercury in the first, which would
right?
give them an aversion, I guess. So that would be another challenge, but
They could be, depending on their degrees, I guess they could be in a contrantisha too.
oh, yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I would just say, the balance we just talked about between the sensuality and the intellectual components as they relate to self-esteem, identity, appearance, that tension would be particularly tight, but the mitigating factor of their mutual reception would tell me that this person's probably going to be able to work through that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And Lisa has a question. Says, is it harder to have a quality Mercury other than, well, no, hold on a second. Let me think about this for a second. Is it harder to have a quality Mercury than other planet since Mercury so much of the time is either under the beams, stationed, or retrograde compared to planets further away from the sun?
Well, Mercury could be in its own chariot, first of all,
Right.
in meaning it's in Gemini or Virgo, which would protect it from being under the beams. That's one thing. It could be in its own term, which would give it some support, or its own triplicity, which would give it some support. Its own decan, I guess. Um, Spencer could speak to that more than me, but the to me, Mercury has so much dynamism, right? Like Mercury can be appearing as an evening star or morning star or about to. It can
Yeah.
be stationing as an evening star or morning star. And those different the different phasal dynamics of Mercury make for a lot more than just, Mercury being under the beams all the time. Because it's almost like you have to learn to read Mercury in a chart as more of a process oriented thing than a
Mm.
static thing. It's not like you could read, okay, Venus is in Gemini in my birth chart in the 10th house,
Mhm.
or something like that. It's not under the beams. Or you could even look at like Jupiter's in Aries in my birth chart or something, and it's not under the beams. Okay, so but with Mercury in particular, you really can't read Mercury as a static thing. You have to read it as like, okay, Mercury, like in this chart, where that were the new moon chart. Okay, Mercury's 7 degrees off from the sun and moving out in front of the sun and gaining speed. So Mercury is getting ready for a phasis. It's getting ready for a phasal appearance as an evening star.
Right.
You have to read the life in relation to what Mercury is about to do or in the process of doing, more so than just if it's stationed retrograde, direct, or under the beams. It's much more dynamic than that. I would really recommend Demetra George's
Mm.
new book, her second book on ancient astrology, because I'm pretty sure it's in that one that she
Yeah.
breaks down the whole cycle.
Oh, yeah. She's
Um,
got superior and inferior, cycles of the planets there.
right.
Um, Really great book. Yeah. And for those of you who are looking for that book, that is Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice. Volume 1 and Volume 2 is about to come out for pre-order. So you can pre-order Volume 2 at this point, which Volume 1 was about planetary condition. And I believe Volume 2 goes more into house placement of the planets as well, correct? Right? I'm thinking.
Yeah. Because I pre-ordered mine recently, and that's where I had gotten that from as well. So
Yeah. Okay, so that looks like the questions that we have for now. I think you bring up a great point about Mercury, Mercury being that deity that was going between worlds, crossing boundaries. And, it is going to be, there's probably going to be a greater percentage of people that have either a combustor and under the beams Mercury because it stays so close to the sun. I think of Mercury almost as like an attendant to the king or something on some level. The messenger, right? It is taking that spiritual awareness and clarity and trying to distribute it between worlds, right? On some level,
I
potentially.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. One other little factor with this new moon that I wanted to add to the mix is we do have a fixed star that is kind of prominent within this lunation. It's called Dubhe, Dubhe, and it is at 15 degrees of Leo, but since it's a very bright fixed star, it does have some impact on this lunation. Dubhe is the alpha star in Ursa Major, the great bear that is circling the pole. So in the research that I was doing, they were talking about the quality of stillness, insight, persistence, endurance, passive strength, like kind of a yin receptive strength rather than being yang and active, um, receiving others and lending nurturing. There was some significations with the bear also potentially being thought of as a plow or a wagon. So there's kind of this carrying quality to it as well. So that's something that we could think about moving forward with Dubhe circling the pole. I like to think of those stars on the pole as like immortality, right? Because they don't necessarily rise or set, and a lot of the star meanings associated with that were about chasing the immortal and like the eternal and things of that nature.
That's really beautiful.
One other thing that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, the first aspect that the moon makes when it comes out from under the bond is a conjunction with Mars. So I often tend to try to analyze these lunations as what is the first aspect that it's going to make outside of its bonded period within 15 degrees of the sun. What do you think about the moon and the sun, or the moon and Mars, excuse me, coming together as the first aspect here?
Yeah, I think I've been looking at that as well, though not from the standpoint of the first aspect outside of the bond, but more so from the thing that I'm making a connection to is the fact that Mercury is about to enter its exaltation in its own domicile, and that it has this pretty magnificent conjunction to Mars. Like, when you have a Mars Mercury conjunction with an exalted Mercury, that is such an effective, like productive, earthy place for Mars and Mercury to conjoin. And I guess with looking at it from the standpoint of the moon being out of the bond and making the conjunction with Mars, to me, it would almost point to the same, almost like an omen foretelling of something to come in the moon cycle ahead.
Yeah.
So I would think of that as being, maybe a sign that the moon cycle ahead is also going to involve this kind of a critical period of questioning or of research analysis and like meaningfully breaking something apart. The other thing would be a period of really kind of effective mental executive energy to do things, to act because of like strong ideas and intelligence, and to understand or comprehend something, skill acquisition or skill development, and to grasp something. Like when I think of it's funny because right now I'm doing pretty regularly taking jujitsu lessons.
Nice.
And it's kind of like it's wrestling. It's like called a grappling art. And so Mercury was associated with wrestling traditionally, and court games and things that went back and forth or that would like grapple and tangle with each other.
Yeah.
So I also think about this in terms of like athletic accomplishments or grappling with something mentally, but coming out stronger or more aware or accomplishing something through a kind of grappling or wrestling with. That's been coming to my mind a lot just because of the headspace that I've been in with these classes.
Well, that feels very martial too, doesn't it? Like this wrestling with something.
Right.
Well,
Like,
once again, you've anticipated a decan.
Okay, good.
Like, so like the craftsmanship part of it. So this decan, first decan of Virgo, is Eight of Pentacles, where we see someone, an apprentice of an advanced age, working on their craft. So yes, I think this really fits with what we were saying earlier about if you're having success with something, don't rest on your laurels. Don't get too full of yourself. If you've got if you've been crowned, you got to keep working on your craft if you want to maintain your abilities if you want to maintain your position or whatever it is, you can't forget the hard work that got you there, right? And I could see that coming to the fore with the moon and Mars as well.
Nice.
Um, just one other tiny note with that: 7 degrees of Virgo is on a fixed star called Thuban, and that is the dragon that is guarding the golden apples in the Garden of Eden around the pole star.
Oh, wow.
So there is some hoarding significations with this. So what I've learned at having Jupiter on this exact degree is that I love to collect knowledge. I love to collect books, but it only continues to flow when I let it move through me. So instead of hoarding a book or hoarding a knowledge, I'm like, okay, I'm going to share my source. I'm going to post my webinar for free. I'm going to like let it flow through me and not dictate the way that the universe is going to provide back to me, and allow that to be, I don't know, not surprised, but just to create space for that kind of abundance to keep flowing through generosity. So I think it's important when at the end of this bonded period, try not to hoard something. If you've got something that a skill, a gift, let it flow through you. Give it to the world. That's how you can shine that Leo light.
Sure. Yeah, that's really nice.
Okay. Let's talk hexagram here in the last few minutes that we've got. I'm checking the chat. Not seeing any other questions. We just got some good comments talking about Mercury and appreciating your explanation on how that was all working. So the hexagram that I pulled, and this is something I've seen you do as well. I always love using multiple divinatory systems. This is something that I got much more comfortable doing after reading that Jeffrey Cornelius book that you recommended. Kind of getting, I don't know, it's that not getting attached to form and really seeing if essence can come through, and really realizing that astrology is also just kind of a divinatory practice like some of these other things, and see if we can find connections. So I'm drawing on the screen hexagram number 19, moving to hexagram number 22. Any thoughts on hexagram number 19 there, Mr. Acyuta?
Yeah. When I think of number 19, I've brought up some of my favorite translations. Like sometimes it's called nearing, promotion, becoming great, advancement. However, even though it seems like a really great hexagram, and it is, there's lots of promise in this hexagram that has to do with, look, if you do good things, you kind of like the, whatever it was, 6 of Wands, was it? Mm-hmm. You get a victory parade. You do good things, you get honored. You do good things, you get advancement. Right. If you've been firm and correct and persevering and put the work in, you get stuff. It's like a law of karma. However, the second part of this hexagram is be mindful of the cyclical nature of things. In the 8th month, there will be evil, which is just a way of saying, evil obviously being a kind of an intense translation, but just meaning that this doesn't last forever. And bad things also happen to good people. Mm-hmm. So you can't expect that just because you're in integrity, just because you work hard, just because you put in time, that bad things won't happen to you. Eventually they will. They happen to everyone because there's this cyclical dance. And especially the more that we think it's our virtue, our sincerity, there's a lot of, there's a lot of heroism in like doing the right thing and putting in, and like not caring about the results, just doing it for the love of the game, and then we get a trophy and it's like, what a happy ending. Yeah. But even to that person, they'll tear their ACL or something. You know what I mean? That basketball player will go through. So I think about 19 and I think hard work, but don't get cocky, because the, things happen, good things happen of their own accord and bad things happen of their own accord. And so even though you've earned whatever goodness you're about to receive, it also just happens.
Sure.
And the same thing is true whether you've earned bad things or not. And so that's kind of some of the teachings that I always think about with 19.
Yeah, your comments bring up a thought that I had about Giannis. I don't know if you saw that quote about Giannis recently, where he was in the middle of the finals, and they were like, "How do you stay grounded during all of this, and how do you keep your cool in the middle of this?" And he's like, you know, if I'm focused on the past and my accomplishments, that is my ego. And if I have like 25 points, whatever that day, and I get full of myself, the next day I'm going to suck. And if I'm focused on the future, that's my pride. Like that, if I'm not in that moment, I'm going to be, you know, having an expectancy, right? This kind of like sense of entitlement moving forward if I'm lost in the future. So he said his humility is in the present moment. And I was like, oh man, Giannis, you are laying some wisdom down, right? Just being
Right.
present in that moment. So, yeah, I think that, 19, they also call it like a overseeing. I was reading a translation today that was really interesting where they were talking about the transition of parental, the deceased parent into a venerated beneficial ancestor in ancient Chinese culture. So there is this transition period where there are these ceremonies to honor the dead, that eventually they will be able to become channels for prosperity to reach people here on earth. So going through that transitory process. Um, yeah, the other thought I had with this too is maybe not pushing the river. I got the jellyfish as an animal guide for this this thing. I interdisciplinary going on Venus and Gemini, type of
Some
to
jellyfish in here. Let's just do it.
yeah, right. So, but jellyfish really is an interesting animal because it really is an animal that flows with the ocean current. It's really speaking to stop forcing things and going back to basics, really relaxing a little bit, but also many of them are transparent and you can see their organs and whatnot. And one of the things that Liz Green was talking about, that book is great, by the way. The Astrology of Fate is incredible. And isn't this fascinating that she really anticipated a lot of the Hellenistic revival stuff just by having like super clear knowledge of the myth. Like, I don't know if you noticed that, but my mind was blown reading that. I was like, oh, that's like this Hellenistic technique,
Totally.
So, having transparency with your feelings and being honest. One of the things I like about my definition really of integrity and authenticity is how can you make the inner feeling and the inner essence the same as your outer expression rather than having those two things be disparate and be out of connection and out of union with one another. And I think that's really part of the mission of Leo too, is being able to get in touch with that authenticity and be in the moment. But again, not to let it go to your head and get out of control.
There's
Um,
a weird, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there's a weird way in which Leo can become so conscious of like nobility and virtue and like kingliness or like queenliness. Like, I'm going to be the good thing, and it sometimes takes a while to be able to do that without thinking about it or without honoring yourself as you're doing it somehow, or inflating the very qualities that you're trying to embody in your own head while you're embodying them. So it maybe it's just a learning process where we have to just learn how to be good without thinking about it so much. We're just kind of in it.
Yeah, just allow ourselves to be, right? Yeah, that's a oh, so I love these moments. You're knocking it out of the park by like connecting the dots here, Achuta. Because one of the things that my partner was telling me about the jellyfish, because she's like an animal expert. Okay, she just has all these little factoids that many jellyfish don't have brains. So think about it as, maybe we're not getting lost in overthinking something and we're just allowing ourselves to be, like you were saying with
Right.
that. So very beautiful. So there's two changing lines with this hexagram. So we've got line number, I believe we have line number 2, 3, and 6.
Oh, so
So
there's three changing
yeah,
lines.
3 changing lines. So we've got first the line 2, which says finding response and overseeing. Now this is from Jack M. Balkin.
Mhm.
You should check that book out. I believe it's called The Law of Changes.
Okay.
Amazing, amazing book. He was a Yale professor or something like that who has really given me a lot of insight in addition to that Hillary Barrett book that you suggested, which is also excellent. But it says finding response and overseeing good fortune. There is nothing that is not beneficial. So he's talking about a star on the rise, like we were talking about having the victory parade, winning recognition, keeping going, keeping progressing with determined spirit that you began with, staying humble. We have line number 3 that says overseeing with flattery. There is nothing beneficial in this, but if one has come to grieve over it, there will be no blame. Okay, so again, the quality of humility, not letting praise go to your head, repenting and reforming from mistakes. Yeah, don't let people like puff you up, right?
Yep.
Um, and then one more says magnanimous overseeing, good fortune, no blame. The sage who accumulates wisdom moves beyond personal ambition. Uh, this one talks about magnanimity, service orientated, sharing your knowledge, devotion, and balance. Those qualities benefit people. I wrote down share your gifts, do so with joy, but also humility and not with arrogance.
It was line 6.
That was line number 6. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because if you go to, so that was 19 line 6, is that right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of there's kind of a sequence of growth being outlined in the lines, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. Bottom up, right?
Yep. And I like that the last one, um, I like that the last one in my translation here, I'll just read.
Sure.
The sage returns from retirement to teach and help others who greatly benefit from his experience.
Mm.
It's interesting to me that there's something being connected here between, there was something you were saying earlier about like a figure of knowledge or expertise,
Mm-hmm.
maybe someone who's been decorated with honors because they've achieved a lot or whatever. But this line seems to be saying um, that you should remain approachable. That there's, like, I think another temptation of greatness or success or some kind of breakthrough would be to become less accessible for people, to become almost like, well, I put the work in, so my work is done. Kind of, I'm heading to Maui or something. Like almost like not so much getting high on yourself, which is one temptation we've outlined. The other one would be to check out.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Saying, oh, I've already achieved this. What is my motivation to continue? Right.
Let me just tell you a little
Yeah.
example of this in my
Sure.
humble opinion. Okay, so we're both basketball fans. The
Yeah.
difference between Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. Okay, to me, their basketball careers aside, one of the ways that I personally define their legacies is that Michael Jordan has largely gone off to Maui. I
Hmm.
mean, just comparatively. I'm not saying he hasn't done anything good for other people, but he's like comparatively gone off to Maui after his retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Kobe Bryant was someone who, when he retired, really started investing into like women's basketball, into his daughter,
Right.
into spreading wisdom to all the young players coming in. Like he really felt like his service was still needed. And I think there's a humility in that I've always just personally been like, I wish MJ would have been more like that. There was something so alluring about Michael Jordan's game, but um, he was so cocky, you know what I mean? And also like not really available in his retirement. And I've always just, as someone who enjoys watching the lives of athletes beyond their sporting career, I've
Yeah.
always found that comparison to be the thing that tilts me in the direction of Kobe a little bit. Not that anyone cares or that my opinion is absolute, but like maybe that's somewhat analogous to these two things we're talking about.
Well, I seem to remember during his playing career that he was widely criticized for not getting involved in social justice
Yeah.
movements, and
Yes, exactly.
had that famous quote where he was saying, Republicans buy shoes too.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
he was being criticized by the Black community for not speaking up for those issues. And it's really fascinating to see that difference with Kobe, and to think about Michael being an Aquarius sun, where he's
Hmm.
maybe like saying, all right, I'm going to pull back and I'm just going to be the observer now, right?
Right.
Kobe was the Virgo sun, where saying, I'm going to pass my knowledge on and preserve it for generations to come. Because in those Aquarius decans, a lot of those themes are really about leaving the past behind and, like, going off into exile
That's
with
right.
the
Yeah.
sun. So he went off
Yeah.
into exile, where Kobe's like, all right, let's do the skills. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, Kobe didn't get a chance to continue that work because the helicopter crash and whatnot. But I think you're totally right on. And I had this argument with someone the other day because I was watching Last Dance. I was like, I love Michael and I love his competitiveness. He's kind of a jerk,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I
yes.
mean, that's the whole thing about
Yeah,
him. And I don't mean to gossip, but yeah, I
sure.
mean, so that
Yeah,
last line, the sage returns from retirement to teach and help others who greatly
right,
benefit from their experience. So
right.
anyway, that comparison came right into my mind.
Yes, it's perfect. It's perfect. All right. So I'm looking at the chat box here. I know we're coming to the end of our time here. How are you doing on time, Mr. Acyuta, my
What
friend?
time is it? 2:30? Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm ready. I've got to scoot pretty quick here.
Okay. So I I'm not seeing any specific questions here. Um, do you have any final thoughts on hexagram number 22 that we're moving towards real quick?
The second
Yeah.
hexagram is more of the same because that one is about adornment, and that is the hexagram that's about form versus essence in a
Right.
sense.
Right.
Adornment is necessary. Like anyone who says the material world is fake, it's not the real thing, it's just a shadowy reflection. Or someone who says the essence is real, so I'm not going to wear anything that looks attractive. I'm just not going to wear anything that looks attractive to a job interview. It's
Mhm.
like, no, not that's not quite. This hexagram would say adornment is an outer reflection of the inner thing.
Yeah.
And so it's important that there be a correspondence between the two that's meaningful and beautiful and reflective. But essence comes first and form reflects it. But it's not that essence is looked at in a diminutive light, that it's like less than or bad. So it's kind of that hexagram is really about striking the balance between, you could say, form and function, or essence and form, or something like that.
I love that. I love that. There was a translation I was looking at that was talking about this relating to a wedding procession. So this kind of wedding parade that is a symbolic representation of the love and the union of those two people. So, like, acknowledging it publicly and making it kind of this commitment to manifest it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice image.
Okay, we did it. I think we got
Yay.
through here. So this was very exciting. So thank you so much for joining me today, Acyuta. This is so cool. I really am still a huge fan of your work. So grateful that we've been able to, I've been able to learn from you, and that we've been able to become friends. And really, really appreciate you taking the time. And I know you have a super busy schedule, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, and keep up the amazing work. It's been cool to see all the people you've been having on and all the good work you've been doing. You've really, like, seriously developed mad skills when it comes, especially to the decans and the stars. I'm so impressed and so glad you could come and teach all my students about that. So yeah, I love how you're just weaving your own thing with a lot of the new stuff that you're doing. It's really cool.
Thank you so much. That is awesome to hear, and you're filling my little Leo heart with with spiritual fire here. So I will remember not to get my head too big and keep grinding. Keep grinding.
Don't head off to Maui just yet.
That's there you go. Right.
I'm just kidding.
Plenty of work to go. My Virgo plants will keep my brain in check for sure. Okay. So if you are enjoying these videos, first of all, make sure to go visit Acyuta on his channel, Nightlight Astrology. Subscribe to him. Check out his videos, his programs at nightlightastrology.com. If you are new to the channel and you're just checking us out today, make sure that you subscribe here to Spencer Michaud Astrology. Hit that like button. And if you want to make a material donation to the work that I do, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. All right, everyone. That's what I've got for today. Thank you so much for being here with me, and we will see you the next time. Take care.